Oh, yes, I would like to complete the conversation about shame and how important it is to restore ourselves from shame. And anywhere else you want to go.
Well, let's do that. Let's start there in a moment because I've actually got a story that I haven't admitted to anyone for a long time, and I ended up writing it into one of the books that I've written. It was a
Really?
business book that I put together.
Uh-huh.
And so, and it has to do with shame and how that played on me or preyed on me for nearly a decade. And I didn't realize that it was there. That
Yes.
I'm very interested to see where you might go with a story like that. And it's funny because it merges the two themes from the last conversation about shame, but also death.
Okay.
And it was early on in my marriage. Um, we just had our first child, and then we found out we were pregnant with the second.
Mm.
But right around that time, my wife had contracted a chronic illness, and a lot of the family members were pulling away, and um, just stress was mounting, and there was not a lot of support, and so on. And so then she ended up having a miscarriage, and she took it, of course, very, very hard. And I remember at the time thinking that I didn't react very much to it.
Mm.
Um, And I just had always been a very hard worker. And so I just went back to working very, very hard.
Yeah.
And then in this past year, um, I ended up sitting down and just writing a book of my process and how I think about business and so on. And then I was taking a walk in the neighborhood, and all of a sudden it just came out of nowhere. This is almost 10 years later, came out of nowhere this thought of this whole time, I have been so ashamed as a man that on my watch, someone died because I
Mm.
wasn't good enough.
Mm.
I wasn't creative enough, attentive enough, proactive enough, like whatever it was to maybe create the safety that my wife needed, to be able to invent something that could have made the situation better.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that that had been animating me to want to get better. And then I think over 10 years, I've gotten better and I
Yes.
leveled up and I learned skills and I got new jobs and whatever. And I can now provide for the family and create the safety. And so I sort of won that game. And the memory that came to me while I was taking this walk was kind of like rooting around in either the attic or the basement of my mind and finding a trapdoor and suddenly realizing I know what's buried there. I forgot that something was buried in there. And
Mm.
that's the little one. But then I went and opened it to look, prepared
Uh-huh.
to grieve or to mourn, and then suddenly realized it was gone. There's nothing there. And I'd
Mm.
realized that I had thawed out that grief, I think, by leveling up, by doing the work and finally getting to a point where I could admit to myself, I think I'm now good enough to where that won't happen again. And I'm sorry that happened, but well, things are better now. And it felt good to be able to put that shame down and to
Mm.
realize that it may or may not have been true. It sort of doesn't matter. It's what I was carrying anyway.
Yes.
And so let me just stop there for a second. What goes through your mind is knowing what you know and how you study and observe things, and what does that tell you, or what do you think?
Well, just for people listening who might be having reactions, the first distinction I make is between shame and embarrassment.
Mm,
Um, that we experience embarrassment when we're caught being imperfect in somebody's eyes. And an embarrassment requires an audience or the fear that there was an audience. Oh my
mm,
gosh, I walked out of the restroom with toilet paper hanging out of the top of my skirt. Who saw that? Oh my gosh, who saw that? Um, and embarrassment, I was told by someone who's very involved in these things that the expression die of embarrassment is valid because in the brain, embarrassment presents like a stroke. It
mm,
feels like a stroke in the brain.
mhm,
And so distinguishing that from shame, which in this case, shame requires no audience. It requires no witness. It doesn't even require that if another person that what you experience shame about is that they were harmed in some way by what you did or failed to do, it doesn't even require that they agree with you. They don't have to agree with you that they were harmed. They don't have to agree with you that it was your fault. Shame is between you and you. And it's interesting to me because I've paid attention to where feelings live in the body versus emotions that are zooming around. And so far, shame is the only feeling I've discovered in the same physical part of men and women. We tend to not have things in the same part of the body. Like a woman will have her stack of pancakes and experience so many things here. And I think we talked about that last time. For example, a man, men pay so much attention to other people being happy and very little to their own selves being happy. And so I asked men, so where in your body do you experience happiness? And for the longest time, they couldn't tell me. I had to propose it to them because of my observation. It shows up right here. It
Yeah,
shows
it
that there's like
does.
this thing in the neck and this puffing of the chest and what we would call a moment of ecstasy for women, which will make our feet flutter like a dolphin, or we end up dancing around, and all these things will be happening in our whole body that emanates from here. You know, a man, when he experiences being happy, if it's a big happy, what we call a moment of ecstasy, it'll overflow the chest and the shoulders and flow down the arms and come out the hands. And you'll get the high five, you'll get
Uh-huh.
the grab in the hoop, you'll get even the spank on the rear end of the guy who just helped make that play with you. You know, it gets expressed. Like, yes, Rocky Balboa out the hands. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing, and such an expression of spirit. And it was my late husband, who taught me that the worst part about shame is that it disconnects us from our spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not a big student of the chakras, for example. I mentioned the crown chakra because I just popped out of my mouth a couple weeks ago. But the chakra that represents the sense of self is where
Mm-hmm.
both men and women experience that horrible feeling. And
Interesting. I didn't know that.
yes, and it literally separates us from ourselves, and it comes about by our perception that someone was harmed, and it might even have been ourselves. Someone was harmed as a result of us betraying, and you could fill it in, betraying who we really are, betraying our spiritual values, betraying what we even came to earth to embody, to be for others, that we betrayed some aspect of ourselves, and either ourselves or someone else was harmed as a result of it. And it causes this disconnect.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is, and I think shame is one of the three worst experiences for human beings. Despair and powerlessness being the other two. And the problem is that how it occurs, especially for a man, is that as such a huge failure, that whatever domain he classifies it as, he doesn't ever want to go back there. So if he failed in a marriage, doesn't ever want to get married again. If he failed in a business, he doesn't ever want to own a business again and be responsible for all those mortgages, for example. If he failed, one of the things you guys say is, I should have been there. I should have been there. And we'll try to argue you out of it. We'll literally try to apply logic to shame, and it doesn't work. Like, you couldn't possibly have been there. Our daughter was, on the other side of the world when that happened. I still should have been there. Or in what you were sharing, that shame that we experience, it, it's from usually associated with that we've betrayed our own values and someone was harmed as a result of it.
Mhm.
And our values, our highest values are spiritual values. And so that betrayal, that failure, as we interpret it, it disconnects us from our sense of self.
Mhm.
Now, and the failure is so enormous, we never want to go back there ever again. So whatever we've classified that failure as, like a failure in in relationship, a failure in business, a failure as a parent, um, we don't want to risk it again. It was so horrible. So let's just stay away from that part of life. And and it can begin what I call the road to hell.
Mhm.
Because one of the things, and it's especially men, you have what um I would call a lifetime deserving equation. And you're keeping track of all the good that you've done and all the bad that you think you've done. And what that adds up to is what you deserve. And it could not add up very well, in which case you could think you deserve nothing. Now, that would be fine if we could live on nothing, but there are things that we need. And so what happens is a man thinks he doesn't deserve something, but he needs it, so he takes it. And then he's ashamed of himself for having taken it. So there's more shame, so he thinks he deserves even less, but he still needs it. So he
Mhm.
takes it. And so he's in this spiral, right, of deserving less and less while not needing any less, and separated from his ability to put a stake in the sand. And then this other thing kicks in where, in order to work out the equation, okay, so I'll do more good, right? I'll do more good to balance this out so then I can deserve more. But usually what happens, and I actually witnessed this in an 18-year-old man, he was on the road to hell at that young age. And what he did to try to interact with the shame and how little he thought he deserved was to give more. But he betrayed himself, he sacrificed himself and things that he needed to give more. So
Mhm.
he was in this endless
Yeah.
swirl of not deserving, trying to deserve, and taking instead. And
Mhm.
I encountered this because of how my commitment to free will and it means the power to choose. Freedom means the power to choose, including, to me, the most important power is to choose who you are. And what we discovered first was working with women on this, and then in a whole different way working with men. It's called being extraordinary as a man. That in order to embody our spiritual values, which is the only way they'll be there in crisis, right? Our instincts are hardwired. So anything else we want to have as an option in crisis, we've got to get it in our bodies. We have to install compassion, for example. And we can correlate physical needs to what we end up with. We have the physical feeling of that value, that instead of just espousing it, we're being it.
Mhm.
However, many of the physical needs, men think they haven't earned yet. So they want to be great in order to deserve what they need to be great. And we have a process in being extraordinary as a man and a woman. I call it the wormhole. Go through the wormhole. And it's literally to shift the time zone. because deserving is all based in the past. What have I done that equals to?
Mm-hmm.
I deserve this. I'm equal to it. I'm worthy of it because of what
Yeah.
I've done. And it could even be because what I was born as. It's called entitlement.
Mm-hmm.
Deserving and entitlement are very
Right.
close together. But what's interesting about it is that, and you guys are such a paradox. I mean, really, you're the walking resolution of paradoxes, and it's beautiful to me because for yourself, you focus on what you've done, on whether or not you deserve something. But interacting with the people you care about, you're not paying attention to what they've done. You're paying attention to what
No.
they could be or what they could do. Who could
Mm-hmm.
my wife be if she got an hour more sleep? So you guys actually are working towards the future while judging yourself from the past. And then
It's
most,
true.
yes, and then most women will be on the flip side of that, judging themselves from the past. Do I deserve for him to care for me this way? Do I deserve to be loved this way? Do I deserve this expression? Well, I want it, but I don't deserve it. So then
Mm-hmm.
what will I owe?
Mm-hmm.
And we don't want to owe. Nobody wants to owe.
Yeah.
And
It's funny to think about this with my wife when
please.
well, have conversations and so on. And I realize how I treat her is how I treat everybody is how I want to be treated. But then I have to like wake up at 2 a.m. and realize I'm not actually treating myself with the same measurement that I'm treating others, the sense of desire to be, maximally forgiving and encouraging and forward thinking for everybody. And yet for myself, it's like you said, look at your checklist, I've found kind of the only sort of prayer, talking
Mm.
to a Catholic audience of men here, the only prayer that's helped me, because I end up in this spiral. It's like a hell of my own making, right?
Yes.
And I was never asked to sort of be in it, and I was never told I should be, but somehow we just sort of walk backwards into it. And I found the only prayer that's helped me make sense is to literally say something like, Jesus, you loved me first. I don't
Mm.
feel like I deserve anything.
Yes.
And we get a lot of, spiritual advice that says stuff like, well, you don't deserve anything. You do deserve a lot of, whatnot. So for me to be able to pray instead, Jesus, you loved me first
Yes.
before I had a thought. And you get that lovely scripture verse, before you were formed in the womb, I knew you. I loved you.
Oh,
And so
oh,
for me, that takes the pressure way down. And I can be like, okay, it almost doesn't matter what I think about me. I have a fresh baseline I need to be operating out of.
mm,
Different way to make decisions. So what I think is so interesting about what you're saying, and this is sort of the long way around to come back to the conversation of heroism across these conversations we've had of if you take heroism apart, what's working underneath it that drives men to take these insane decisions of just bravery that might even be a silent walking bravery, like being a walking dead for 50 years and nobody notices them. But for them on the inside, it feels like the most heroic thing they could think of to just do whatever the thing is. And it's this shame, internalized shame. Um, and then there's also you know, the fact that death is this constant pressure or presence or judge that we're constantly evaluating ourselves against. And to be looking at both of those and realizing it's a bit like Indiana Jones, facing that canyon. And the there comes a point where canyon's there, and I've got to be on the other side of it, and it almost doesn't matter what I do. I have to jump this thing. And so you just step blindly out into an impossibility, and then you find the path.
mm,
And I think that's what pulls men towards taking up things that are heroic, like maybe deciding, for example, I'm going to join the army, I'm going to volunteer for this or that service. It's going to be completely impossible and unthankful, and it's going to be pain for years. But knowing that I did or tried to do something good will
mm.
balance out the scales of everything else that seems to be counting against me. Um, I have no idea if most men would agree with me, but that's kind of what goes through my mind as I'm looking at the fact that there seems to be a trilogy of of ideas that circle around each other in the masculine heart.
Mm. I, being very interested in free will, which I think is one of the biggest gifts we were given by God. The dad who lets his kids move out of the house and doesn't install cameras in the new apartment. Lets us make our own way. And so I have a problem. I have a bone to pick with what shame drives us to do, because it will take over our will in that endless cycle of trying to deserve what we need. And there's two places that my brain wants to go to. So we created a process called Noble Forgiveness. And it's a very simple process, and somebody can do it. They can do it in writing. They can do it in conversation with someone else, as long as the other person is listening to them as an honorable person committed to restoring their honor. And women do this exercise in our Understanding Men course, which is now online. So you can see women engaging in this and get the form yourself. And it's just this very simple process of, I harmed or hurt, fill in the blank, this person, when or by, without any because, without any, I did that because, without any justification whatsoever. And then if it's in person, the person says, thank you for owning that. If it's in writing, you could say, and I own that. Anything else about that? And there might be a bunch of phrases, all the other people that they hurt in the same way. In this case, in our Understanding Men course, women are owning the ways that they harmed men by emasculating them, by diminishing them accidentally or purposefully. And when you get to whatever you got to say about it, because sometimes a lot we have to say about it until finally there's nothing more to say about that. Okay, do you forgive yourself? And what I encountered when we were developing this was the same thing. No, I don't forgive myself. I don't deserve to forgive myself. I pay penance in order to deserve to forgive myself. Well, I'm tricky, and I'll be tricky. I'll do anything to fight for the quality of people's lives. And what I figured out was that shame has enormous benefits. That shame actually protects us from future failures because we're not heading back in there. But meanwhile, we're MIA. We're missing from that part of life. Our sons and daughters and parents and people who'd love to work for us, that we're just missing because we don't ever want to fail like that again. But really what it is it's a lack of courage. And it's one of the most beautiful things that I love about men is I've actually challenged them to have the courage to forgive themselves. And in that moment, when they truly forgive themselves, this opening just occurs, just begging for them to commit to some beauty in life. And don't figure it out ahead of time, because it'll just be penance. It'll be to try to deserve it. No, forgive yourself and then listen for what's calling you. And every time I've gotten to be present to this, which is many times, the commitment is so much bigger than any penance ever would have been. It has so much more true beauty in it than any penance ever would have been. And on the other hand, for any of the women who might be watching this, one of the first things I learned from in studying men was a man who said, penance must be served. And I was like, yeah, you did something wrong. You got to serve your penance. And then he went on to say, you must tell him how to make it up to you. he is compelled. He is compelled to do penance. Tell him how so that he can do it and then be done with it. And it's like, s- it was one of the moments in my life. This was 1995. And it's like, oh my gosh, m- men are ashamed for when they've failed us and they want to know how to make it up to us. And but we gotta tell them how, and we gotta mean it. Which was the beginning of my husband would hurt my feelings terribly, and he'd wanna fix it. And I had this thing that I would do, and I've done this with my partner now too, is I've pictured myself in the future. You know, in those points, I don't even wanna know this man, the father of my children. I don't even wanna know him. I'm so hurt. And then I picture myself, this is an act of will, imagination is an act of will, and I imagine being in love with him. Not just loving him, that's the easy part, but being in love with him. Just imagine it, imagine. So many years, 28 years being in love with this man, right? Imagine being in love with him, and then I ask myself the question, how did I get here? And I don't know where it comes from, but it was often very specific.
Hmm.
He said this, he did that. He'd hurt my son terribly. And I'm like, okay, you and Jeff need to fix the toilet together. Then you need to buy him a skateboard. And then you need to clean up the side yard, the RV parking, and we didn't have an RV. You need to clean it up so the kids can ride their scooters and bikes and skateboards around there. And wherever this stuff would come from, he always got the perfection of it. Like he knew, yes, that's what I need to do. And he would just go at it and go do it and be so empowered. He would end up restored because he's deeply ashamed for how he treated Jeff, like this little kid that he'd just gone furious on, which being a stepfather to a boy, I think is the hardest. Being a stepmother to a girl is the next hardest. Um, so really that I consider forgiving oneself to be a courageous act, to be an act of bravery. It's heroic
Hmm.
to forgive yourself.
Hmm.
And it helps if you have the faith that, so Jesus already forgot me, already forgave me. No, didn't forget me. Jesus already forgave me. Who
Hmm.
am I to say I know better?
Right.
Like,
There's
the
that line from the
arrogance
Our
of that.
Father, right?
What?
Well, that's true. There's the line from the Our Father, right? Where we
Yeah.
pray,
Mhm.
forgive us as we forgive others.
Yes.
And we don't often forgive ourselves, like what you're saying. Like, well, if I want to be forgiven for dumb stuff, I should probably work on being as forgiving to myself as God is routinely forgiving to me. Like he still gave me a new sunrise. So he
Mhm.
must think I've got something in me to still go for another day. And this goes back to, the conversation about addiction, in that I
Yes.
think the biggest difficulty is that we're addicted to being ourselves before we've even really figured out who we are. And
Mm.
then we get completely stuck in the past. And then we get further stuck because we assume that version of ourselves that we built when we were 18 doing that cool thing, or when the boss gave me that one promotion at that one time, we assume that this is the version of me that has to endure into the future. And it's not. It was meant for that moment. It's celebrated at that moment, and then we're called to be a little more flexible and plastic and attentive to the moment. And who you are now is not who you're going to be in 10 years. But it's
Mm.
very difficult, I think, to go through life thinking like that. And I think there's moments, this is why we tell stories, quite honestly. It's impossible to
Yeah.
see. I love stories in media and movies, and this just comes out my ears all the time.
Yes.
Um, most of us go through life desperately trying to be who we think we are, and we become very addicted to that. We're very precious about who that is. And please push back on everything. Um, to be the kind of person who is maximally present and open to like a fully mature creative response to what the moment needs without losing your sense of self, but being who you need to be every moment, every year, it is exhausting. That's where it goes back to that phrase of butt dialing your way through life, because that's so much easier to do. And I
Yes.
think we tell stories, and almost every story follows the whole hero's journey, because what's the point of that story is that who you thought you were cannot endure what the world has thrown at you. And the harder you are, which is why we tell anti stories, the stronger character you are, the harder you resist and you push back against what life needs you to become. And you can't see it, you can't do it. And so you throw car chases and bad guys and everything at this main character. Like, would you please grow up and soften to become who you need to be by the end of the story? And at least
Mhm.
when men tell stories, that's always how it is. It's like you have to go through hell to burn off the bits that aren't actually you so that you can finally forgive yourself. I just watched the new movie, which I thought was so much fun. It's such a guy movie. It's called War Machine on Netflix. It just landed. It's an alien invasion and a soldier who's incredibly guilt tripped and ashamed over having failed his brother.
Yes.
Now goes through absolute hell to try to save the rest of his platoon and try to get them all home because now they are all his brother as a team, and so he's sort of trying to play this out. Finally, at the end, because of course he wins in his own way, he can finally rest
Mhm.
because who he was has finally been burned off. And I think this is the point of, like, we talked about purgatory and hell a little while back. That's the
Yes.
point of why these matter to this. But if you stay there, then it just feels like hell all the time because you can't get out of it because you're not actually being free. You're trying to run an old play.
Mm.
And I think that's when you get somebody who does something incredible, we look at that and go, my gosh, that must have taken heroic effort to overcome the fear of death that holds you back from making a change and the shame that was keeping you where you were. To be able to overleap that, I mean, it's absolutely heroic. And the guy goes, maybe it wasn't. It was just I chose to love that person or that outcome
Mm.
more than I loved who I was or who I thought I was. I just had to learn to let that go.
Wow, you said a lot. I we could call it identity, we could call it ego. That self that we try to preserve and be true to, I'm not sure that it's a true north.
I agree.
And what I do that has uh, been astonishing to have a life as a result of it. It happened the first time I was supposed to interview s- the League of Women Voters in Orange County was doing a series on homelessness and hunger in the county, and I was an advocate. I was the chairwoman of the county task force, and they asked me would I interview these people, and it would be on film, and I'd be interviewing them. And I'd never interviewed anybody for anything, and this was a really important project to them. I had no idea how to do it. And I was walking down this grassy hill to get to the site that they had all this set up for, and I was a bit of a wreck. And then I just stopped myself, just paused for a moment, and I prayed. And I I don't know where it came from because I don't pray for things like maybe they'll be given to me. I
Mhm,
my prayers always start with thank you
mhm.
and thank you for the thing that I know will be granted. And so what was there was thank you, God, for having me be whatever I need to be to get your work done. And I walked down the hill and the professional filming staff was like, "Have you done this before? You're like Connie Chung," right? And I was just like, and I'm just inside going, "No, God's just having me be what I need to be to get His work done now." And that prayer every time I'd walk into riding that wild lion of Dennis Prager or walk up on stage in front of people who just have a bone to pick with men, or I mean, sit down to let a book come through. Thank you, God, for having me be whatever I need to be to get your work done. Sometimes today, sometimes in the next hour. And it's the oddest thing because I remember talking to Morgan Freeman about Keys to the Kingdom and how I didn't write it. And he said, they have a name for that, you know. And I said, what? He said, talent. And I said, it doesn't feel like talent. And he looked at me and he goes, it never does. And this was like 2 weeks before he won the Oscar for the boxing movie, right? And I just think that thing, that preservation of self and who I think I am, and I mean, like that is, it literally will prevent miracles. It'll prevent s- such beauty, such surprises, such extraordinary. What? Do you know?
Mhm.
Yes. So I try to unearth and release anything associated with that, like preferences, for example. Talk about an expression of ego and identity.
Right.
Mike, when I discovered this, I realized my preferences have preferences, and I take them very seriously. And my day is
Yeah.
organized dawn to dark over my preferences. No, 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 no,
Yeah.
no, 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 no,
Mhm.
not anymore. Um,
Mhm. I like the metaphor somebody once shared, which is that we over demonize ego, and he's like, ego can be fantastic, but ego is fuel. You put fuel in the gas tank. You don't pour it in the driver's seat. It's the wrong place for it. Oh, that's perfect.
it's like going through life butt dialing.